And you can also do that, right? So did that change for everyone now? You can do that if you go to select someone who doesn't have a screen, and you click, you have the option, you know, hide non-video participants, show non-video or hide non-video participants. So how can I project?
Audio through the HDMI. That audio.
How can I project here? How can I project?
Have you put it in here?
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't work with the computer.
Oh, I need to set up. Is it on? Yeah.
I'm getting signal.
Should we change it on HDMI 1? It should be. Okay, it should be, I guess. It was not on, wait a second. Now it's on. It should. This is
I want.
we can try to set
We have it or we don't have it?
Could the speaker say something?
Could someone say something? Good. Yes, you are talking. The sound is not there, but it should be good. Yeah, the sound was not there. But it should be not there.
You just took off
Yeah, but it's not
just to know. You exchange them? Yeah, leave it out then. Because this one, right?
Yeah,
You can take it out, this one. It's not true. This one. Okay.
Dzień dobry Państwu. Już minęła pora startu konferencji. Proszę o cierpliwość. Ostatnie techniczne korekty tu ze strony organizatora. Jak widzicie, Państwo uczestnicy już są gotowi. Proszę jeszcze o chwilę cierpliwości. W konferencji wezmą udział zdalnie łącząc się inni prawnicy, więc w tej chwili trwa ich podłączenie do systemu.
Hello? Can someone say something?
Bonjour.
Oh, I hear you in the room, I don't hear you.
Get it in the room?
Yeah, I I want to leave it there. Put it up live, right? Can I say something quickly? Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not recording, all right? No, I guess we're not. Holding.
Go ahead. There seems to be a little bit of misconception about who we are. George Webb, who was the Minister of Justice, has tweeted that there's a WHO press conference today at 3 p.m. You'll find out if it's another secret. So I just been trying to say this is a civil society initiative.
Okay. If people tune in thinking we're on the World Health Organization, that's all too good.
Karen, can you bring your PC here and get that microphone? Can you get the microphone?
Yes, yes.
Can we get no, we don't have to be Oh, okay, so it's going to, so how do I hear them? Yeah. And we hear them?
Depends on the laptop. We'll pick up local audience.
Yeah. Not yet. Finishing the setup. So we might be a little late, just finishing the setup. Hello? Catherine, are you muted? Yes.
Can we do a sound check, please?
Yeah, that's what we are working on today.
Yes, in front.
Okay, now my micro. Can you hear me?
You start without.
Micro.
You hear me? You hear me?
We want you to...
So I can?
Which is the projector? No, because if I can moderate, then I...
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Sorry. It's important to close and
I know it.
to talk very close to the mic.
Basic.
As soon as you're here.
Testing.
As close as possible.
No, you don't need that. Could Mary say something? Mary say something?
Hello.
And can you try to manage this?
Wiesz co, ja zaczynam. W Genewie jestem. Teraz zaczyna się konferencja. Tak, tak. Zaczyna się konferencja. Wieczorem 19:30. Jutro. Tak. No to wiesz trochę książek. Dobra, już kończysz, na razie. Dobra, cześć. Cześć, muszę kończyć teraz.
A bit more, just continue, because we are trying to set this up.
Sure. We're going to be discussing the international health regulations today and the conclusion of the World Health Assembly.
It's not last. It was
No,
not
not
last.
Okay.
Can we turn the room some?
No, I can tell you, I don't know if it's very loud.
Sure. So we're going to be talking today about the World Health Organization and its response to COVID and why it is unfit to be the global health dictator of the world. And I look forward to hearing perspectives from many people here today who have many important insights into what's really been happening over the last during the time of these negotiations and before that. I will talk about how we get here and a little bit about generations, particularly with respect to vaccines, and then in the COVID situation and why COVID is so dangerous. What's the problem, Ursula?
We are just struggling with fixing the voice so we can hear you properly in the room. It's a bit quiet.
Where is the voice coming from now? I don't
Where is the voice is coming through there, right? There is the
Where is the
voice.
speaker for this? What you can hear now? I don't know it.
It should be there. Isn't it there?
Now it's
We can hear you very well, or I can hear you very well.
Maybe the TV. Right? Yeah.
Organizator ma kłopot z ustaleniem poziomu głosu na Zoomie, bo jest zbyt niski i stąd się przedłuża start konferencji.
Yeah, 1 second, that video.
Okay, just wanted to be sure. I'm not, I'm trying to, still have to go fix my hair.
Can you talk? Can someone keep talking?
Sure, I'll keep talking.
Yeah.
So I wanted
good.
to, yeah, is that better, Ursula?
Yeah.
O,
Great. Okay.
już uzyskano lepszy efekt, więc jest nadzieja, że zaczniemy.
We have the voice. I guess it's a projector, it shouldn't be right. Yeah. That's good. Mary, sorry, can you just welcome everyone again?
Yes. Welcome to this press conference about the World Health Assembly recent negotiations on the international health regulations and the future of the World Health Organization. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's super, thank you.
Great.
So we are good to go.
We are,
You're-
okay, I think okay, we start? No, it's okay.
Oh, instructions, they are sharp.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Do they hear it when they start? Catherine, can you have your mic on?
Testing one. I'm ready as well.
Oh, and you want it on?
Yeah.
Then you're gonna get a reverberation. Because it's playing in the room.
Oh, okay.
Ready?
Sorry.
So I can hear this through my earbuds.
Okay. Did you mute your mic?
I don't hear the music.
As long as the mics are being used, will we use the mics? Are you testing? Testing? Testing?
Yes, this is a test. It works.
Recording in progress.
Okay.
Go.
Good afternoon, everybody. Bonjour. Grüezi miteinander. Schönen guten Tag. It is my great pleasure, on behalf of a group of lawyers and of WHO experts around the globe from many different countries, to welcome here in Geneva the press and to welcome at home everybody on the screen, from here in the Geneva Press Club. My name is Philip Kruse. I'm attorney at law with my practice law firm in Zurich. Today is Saturday, 28th May 2022, and it is the closing day of the World Health Assembly 75th session. What us all brings together is our shared experience that during the 2.5 past years, we have seen our governments calling for more powers for emergency law purposes. We have seen in our cases that we presented for our clients that our courts, regional and high courts, did not respect the Constitution, did not perform their constitutional duties in terms of independent examination of the legally relevant facts. Our national courts refused to do this constitutional duty. And the reason we were always given was, we live in a pandemic. We all share the experience that also our national parliaments refused to perform an act of supervision of our governments. In particular here in Switzerland, where we wrote multiple letters on behalf of the Swiss Lawyers Committee to urge the members of parliament to initiate a process of reinvestigation. Do we really have still a threat for public health? We were given the response, no, we can't do an investigation as long as the status of public health emergency of international concern is still going on. And we could continue our list of joint experience in these terms. The reason, so, why the constitutional order in our countries has been deactivated to such a high degree, and associated with it, why we have seen so much harm for society, for public health, for businesses, is just one reason and one point, and that is the fact that WHO reserves the sole right to determine, to declare, and to extend the the pandemic under the title of Public Health Emergency of International Concern. There are just a few people who are competent, who are doing these declarations. And now, during the past 10 days, this organization has held its World Health Assembly and has discussed, instead of looking back and doing a proper quality control and review their own methods, as it would be normal for every businessman to do, and as it would not be normal as well in public authorities' business. Instead of doing so, they decided we need more powers, we need more funding, we need stronger structures. And this is why we are here. This is what brought many lawyers from different countries together. We have to address this topic as we are about to address and to see an emergency for our democracies, an emergency for our constitutions. So it is a privilege to introduce you here to my right to Catherine Austin Fitz from the United States. She is the publisher of the Solar Report. Very welcome, Catherine. Thank you very much for doing this long way. Then to my left, I have from France the attorney at law with her own practice in Paris, Diane Prota. Sois la bienvenue.
Merci beaucoup pour l'invitation.
C'est superbe que tu es ici. Et puis maintenant, also on my left side, from Austria, Dr. Georg Prochlik with his law firm in Vienna. Welcome here to Geneva. Great that you're here. Also on my left side, from Austria. So, and now with us as well, we have many other lawyers and many other experts around the globe who are with us on the screen via Zoom, and they are being introduced by Polly. Polly is the head of CHD TV. Please, Polly, I turn it over to you. Would you like to introduce our other speakers around the globe?
Hello everybody, welcome to all our online viewers. We have with us Mary Holland, President of Children's Health Defence, who is up next to speak. We also have live here on Zoom Shabnam Paliza Mohammed from the World Council for Health of CHD Africa. Dipali Oja is also here with us. Leslie Manukan is also here with us, and John Titus is also here with us. So we will hear from each one individually. But first up, Mary Holland, President of Children's Health Defence.
Holly, thank you so much, and thanks to Arsolia Giorfi for putting together this distinguished panel to discuss this truly critical development in the world. It's a truism that all politics is local, but World Health Organization has turned this on its head, suggesting that all health is global, and yet this violates everything we know about politics and health. Individuals' actions are the most important factors in determining individual and community health. Local communities, national governments, and finally, international institutions should play roles in creating health policies. Protection of health and individual rights are best achieved at the local level. So WHO is turning global precedent and common sense on its head. I wholeheartedly support international global communication and cooperation. I do believe international institutions are vital in both politics and health. But this communication and cooperation must be on the basis of consent, not coercion. At the heart of the proposals that the World Health Assembly has been considering is removing consent from national governments and providing greater coercive tools to the World Health Organization. This is extremely dangerous. Even more dangerous, from my perspective, is that there is no proposed mechanism for accountability. All of us assembled here know how extremely challenging it is
to hold national and regional governmental bodies accountable for the emergency health regulations we've experienced over the last 2 years. Many of us have been challenging the Food and Drug Administration, the CDC, the National Institutes of Health, the European Medicines Agencies, the European Union, and we know just how difficult that is. The notion of suing international bodies located in Switzerland with vast protections would make it virtually impossible to achieve real accountability. How did we get here? The World Health Organization was created in 1948 with the promise of international cooperation. And I believe the World Health Organization has done some things well, particularly in the areas of research and education. However, its reputation is decidedly mixed. I refer people to the important documentary Trust Who, which details the WHO's regulatory capture by industries that the WHO allegedly regulates: big tobacco, big pharma, big tech. The WHO has become captured by big industry proxies, including their proxies, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Gavi and CEPI and the Wellcome Trust. The capture is absolutely real. And when it comes to vaccines, the WHO has a particularly bad reputation. Vaccines are global moneymakers, and WHO has helped its friends. The WHO's SAGE group, the Strategic Advisory Group experts on immunization, has been instrumental in the globalization of mandatory vaccines. And I don't believe SAGE has ever met a vaccine it didn't like. In 2009, the World Health Organization pushed swine flu vaccines that were made hastily, that terrorized people with the idea that millions would die. They were completely wrong, but many people suffered permanent injuries. The WHO has pushed human papillomavirus vaccines, despite the fact that they've never been proven to prevent a single case of cancer. The clinical trials were fatally flawed, and injuries and deaths have been catastrophic and real. In fact, countries with high uptakes of human papillomavirus vaccine have increases in cervical cancer rates. The WHO has redefined vaccine and pandemic and public health emergency of international concern as it suits its industry masters, making a mockery of language and of the WHO's fitness to lead in international health. Children's Health Defense will be coming out with a documentary in just 2 weeks, Infertility, a Diabolical Agenda, showing the WHO's direct involvement in distributing infertility-causing vaccines in Africa, failing to give any informed consent, deceiving and abusing women. And I would note that under the Treaty of Rome, creating the International Criminal Court, forced sterilization is a war crime. In the COVID era, the WHO's response has been particularly bad. It encouraged travel from China when that had a direct impact on disease spread. It took the WHO 2 years to acknowledge that SARS-CoV-2 is airborne and that ventilation makes a difference. It knowingly suppressed early treatments such as ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine that could have saved thousands, if not millions, of lives. It promoted separation of children and parents in quarantine in the name of disease prevention, something that has happened in China and that has prompted global horror at the sight of toddlers being separated from their loved ones. It endorsed virtually meaningless PCR tests under false premises. It's continued to promote shocks that worldwide data suggest are doing vastly more harm than good, actually suppressing the innate immune system and increasing the likelihood that those jabbed will develop COVID or other illnesses, potentially leading to disease, hospitalization, and death. Despite this appalling record, Director General Tedros and his backers would have us give the WHO virtually dictatorial powers over world governments, the right to declare pandemics whenever and wherever they please, with essentially no oversight or accountability, the ability to send in health SWAT teams anywhere in the world. For the record, I and this group are hardly xenophobes or extreme nationalists. On the contrary, we have assembled an international group understanding just how important it is to view global issues from varying perspectives. I deeply favor international communication and cooperation, but global institutions cannot endorse despotism, tyranny, unaccountability, and corruption. These are unacceptable at the national and international level. People of the world can and should reject any developments that facilitate power grabs by unaccountable leaders and institutions. So in that spirit, I happily pass the baton to my colleagues and look forward to learning more about these important developments in the last 10 days. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mary, for all your contribution. And it is so important to have now a working group that works together, and today's meeting is our kickoff meeting, from where on we take it, as long as we need to bring this message to the people and also to bring accountability to WHO. Now, it is my task now to give you a brief overview on the changes that are now about to be made on the concrete level, and then the changes that we see at the horizon and what to expect from these changes. What made it to the headlines the most under the title of International Health Regulations was the United States proposal. The United States took a fast track by delivering their own proposals of amendment in January this year, which was only made public in as late as April to everybody. That came in the middle of a process that had been initiated exactly 1 year ago by setting up a working group that had to come forward with new proposals to amend the international health regulations. Apparently, that ordinary working streamline was not fast enough, and therefore the United States, the administration of Biden, they came up with their proposal. Luckily, from out of these 13 points of their proposal, the administration withdrew 12 points and joined a group of other countries that came with a counter-proposal just with respect to the rejection period, which is the Article 59, number 1 of the International Health Regulations. And this Article 59, para 1, does now provide a rejection period that so far, for the countries to reject new amendments, so far is still 18 months, to be reduced to 9 months. The United States proposal was 6 months. And then there is, before it goes into force, a period still up to now of 24 months that ought to be reduced to 12 months. This is all what remains from the American proposal in the form of a counter-proposal that was brought forward by a group of states, including the United States, but also Australia, European Union, Japan, Korea, United Kingdom, and so on. So, but what to expect if we look further into the future? What will happen? Well, the ordinary working group that works on the IHR, International Health Regulations, will continue their work. And they have published, quite understandable, into which direction they want to go. They have submitted their final draft on 23rd May, a week ago, and there you can read that there are 4 main areas of change based on a survey they had done. Interestingly, the survey they had done between December and January this year was only replied by 64 member states. And be aware, there are 194 member states. So talking about democracy, talking about engagement of the countries, if you base your new modifications on participation of just 64 member states, this is a very poor proof of democracy. And another poor proof of democracy, the principle of democracy, is that also non-member states were allowed to join this survey process. And we had altogether, we had 60% non-member states parties that joined this process and 40% member states. So this is in itself a no-go for an international organization that should actually represent the interests of the countries. Now, in addition to this final report you can read, I just mentioned, we have another paper that contains a lot of hints where WHO wants to lead us, and this is the paper, so-called paper on health emergency preparedness, response and resilience, published in this recent version of 4th of May. And we don't need to go into the details, but I can just tell you that all these proposals lead to the goal to extend the capacities and the competences and powers of the several branches of WHO in many different ways, including strengthening independent monitoring. There will be in place where countries will be monitored more strictly than they had before. And most of all, opposed to the situation as we have it today, all the measures and proposals will have a legally binding effect. So far today, the recommendations that are issued by the General Director have not a legally binding effect, and that is clearly the case. And still, we have seen in the past 2.5 years, still under the current system, the member states have treated these recommendations as if they were legally binding.
Recording in progress.
So, and then there are many more sources where we can draw the conclusion from that WHO is going to extend its powers into every direction. And it's doing so already since 2016. And the main directions actually should give rise to concern, to big concern, and I will tell you why. Number one, with respect to discovery, and with respect to risk assessment, WHO is keen to establish a system of global total surveillance. It's WHO who will in the future define all legal, policy and technical capacities for surveillance on a 24/7 basis. And this is driven by the idea that every member state should be in the position to at any time, to monitor and also to deliver information to the WHO on its health status, health situation. Then more also concerning is the fact that it will be WHO to define what virus or subvirus actually will be defined as a threat. And they will put it on a list, and that list cannot be challenged, cannot at all, as we have seen the past 2.5 years, put in question. If some constructed virus makes it on the list and it is somewhere discovered by some PCR test, you can be sure that will give rise to a public health emergency of international concern. And this is the next point. The Director General of WHO is vested with an unparalleled executive authority under the international health regulations in the future to declare and recommend emergency status, not only of international concern, but also of regional concern or just intermediary, provisional health emergency status. And that would then, as we know, trigger our member states to, in our countries, to declare national emergency, so with national extra powers and national extra measures, putting our courts to the sidelines and putting our national parliaments, making them statistic figures. And all of that goes together with an facilitation of, as they call it, procurement and authorization. WHO is engaged actively in promoting and facilitating the delivery of vaccine substances and to make it as easy as possible for the producer to produce and ultimately to deliver these vaccines without proper control, whether these vaccines really serve the purpose and whether they would do more good than harm. And this leads me to the final point I make, and I see the slide is already on. We run all the risk that actually with accepting the changes that are in the pipeline, which have not been talked about yet, but they are in the pipeline, that we will be caught in a never-ending pandemic creation cycle that can be controlled by WHO only. And there will be no chance of any supervision, no revision, no revised assessment. From the point of a better surveillance, 24/7, to the definition of the disease, and then to the extension of the powers of the Director General to declare alerts in any way and to prolong it. And as you all know, we are still today under a status of public health emergency, to the better delivery of the vaccines and to the enforcement also of lockdowns and so on. So that is frightening to me as a lawyer, because that will deactivate with one single declaration. To be clear here, if Tedros is whispering something like pandemic with 1 second, he will shut down for as long he wants our constitutions, our democracies, our businesses, economies, and that will have a big impact, a negative impact also on public health. And so this is now why we are here together, and this is why we are called to action, and you can be sure we do it cross over the globe, over all the countries. Our duty will be, as we call ourselves, we gave the name International Alliance for Justice and Democracy, and our duty will be to first inform the public, that the public can start action and put some pressure on the political level. Then, in addition, a point must be that we insist in proper investigations, that really put under scrutiny, was it really was it justified to call out pandemics on the international level? This reassessment, this re-evaluation also stretches to all countermeasures and to the principle of strict quality control. And there are many more things, you can be sure we will start, and as this is a big project, we can only do it together, and I'm very happy that we found each other and that we are a group of high qualified experts, and hereby this is a call to all my lawyers colleagues, to all my expert colleagues in the world. Please join us. Join our global alliance for justice and for democracy, and reach out to us so that we can work together. Thank you very much. Now,
it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Shabnam Palisa Mohammed, World Council for Health and Children's Health Defense Africa. Thank you, Shabnam.
Thank you, Polly, and thank you to our brilliant colleagues from around the world, legal and other experts taking the stand for health, for autonomy, and for sovereignty. So this part of my presentation will focus on conflicts of interest within the WHO architecture, as well as certain observations and analysis covered by my colleague Philippe. Controversial proposed amendments to the IHR 2005, as well as a proposed new pandemic accord about which there's been really little to no actual public participation, both facilitated by the WHO, have led to robust discussions and debates about the centralization of health by the WHO, by the United Nations, and of course by the World Economic Forum, and by extension, influential investors. Now, the secretive nature of these processes surrounding both the IHR and the new pandemic treaty strike at the very heart of democracy. Historical complaints about the lack of public participation within the WHO and the United Nations are not new. Several civil society organizations have in the past lodged complaints, but to no avail. The WHO and the United Nations are not built on democratic principles, but rather through monopoly, and more specifically, corporate monopoly. Indeed, it is through a civil society campaign that countries are now objecting to the WHO's infringement of personal autonomy and national sovereignty. I'd like us to first focus on conflicts of interest as it relates to mismanagement and corruption. A previous Director General of the WHO, Margaret Chan, admitted in a must-watch documentary called Trust Who that the WHO has no choice but to go around cap in hand for funding to run its operations. Yet, as India has discovered and reported at the current World Health Assembly number 75, there are several irregularities with the money being given to the WHO. Indeed, this is a serious matter deserving of an investigation by legal and financial experts. It is important to note that the WHO has an established history of maladministration, corruption, and conflicts of interest. What then is a conflict of interest? One of the legal definitions includes, it is a term used to describe the situation in which a public official or fiduciary who, contrary to the obligation and absolute duty to act for the benefit of the public or a designated individual, exploits the relationship for personal benefit, typically financial. We might have heard by now that the WEF and the WHO have announced a partnership towards a 2030 agenda. And certainly this organization and others will be keeping an eye on this partnership as we work towards creating alternative pathways for health, autonomy, and freedom. So let's talk about the types of conflicts of interest that exist. Number one, actual, potential, or perceived conflicts of interest. Two, these conflicts of interest can be financial or non-financial. Three, they can be direct or indirect. Four, they may involve personal or professional relationships. Five, they are conflicts of role and duty. And six, a predetermination on decision making. Due to the influence of private money, in a Journal for Integrative Medicine, a WHO whistleblower review stated that the WHO is the biggest threat to the world's public health of our time. In assessing conflicts of interest, the question to be asked is, would a reasonable person think that a competing interest or conflict or appearance of conflict or a possible conflict with the duty to act in the best interest of the entity it has influence in and control over? Let us turn to now talk about some examples of conflicts of interest. Given the restrictions of time in this very important event, I'm going to highlight 8 of them very quickly. The WHO is predominantly funded by the private stakeholders. These include the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Gavi, and the Wellcome Trust. Those who have been studying conflicts of interest at an intense level may also realize that these organizations are intrinsically connected to BlackRock and Vanguard. Number 2, the WHO direct contributions to the WHO include Big Pharma via Johnson & Johnson, Merck, Pfizer, GlaxoSmithKline, Sanofi Pasteur, Sinovac, the Serum Institute, and others. 3. The WHO's personal injury protection and in-kind contributions are also dominated by Big Pharma payments. 4. The WHO signed a long-term partnership agreement with the Wellcome Trust, whose major donors are Big Pharma and corporations such as JP Morgan Chase, all with major shareholdings in Big Pharma. 5. The WHO Global Vaccine Action Plan appointed a leadership committee consisting of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, the NIAID, UNICEF, and of course, the WHO. All these entities have a direct investment in and are beneficiaries of the vaccine industry. 6. The WHO's funders and decision makers often include individuals who own patents in or interest in products, including the vaccine products and vaccine technology. 7. There is a veil of secrecy around delegates at the World Health Assembly, and these delegates do not consult with the people of their country before voting on decisions that have considerable and significant impact on health, on autonomy, and on sovereignty. 8. The Director General of the WHO has been accused of people, including his homeland Ethiopia, of the mismanagement of Ebola, the abuse of office, and the support of civil war. A complaint to that effect was submitted, but has seen no outcome. Let us now turn to talk about amendments to the IHR, given this context on conflicts of interest, mismanagement, and corruption. In January this year, the US Department of Health and Human Services submitted 13 amendments to the Director General on the International Health Regulations 2005. Again, due to a concerted and collaborative civil society campaign, 12 of the 13 amendments to the IHR were taken off the table at the World Health Assembly number 75. And certainly, this is an achievement that is worth celebrating. These 13 amendments included an article that would give the Director General Tedros, who has been re-elected, unilateral power to declare actual or potential public health emergency of international concern, also giving affected or potentially affected or suspected to be affected countries a mere 48 hours to respond to an offer for assistance by the WHO. Let me pause at that point to mention that Bill Gates has been busy putting together what he calls GERM, which is a project including 3,000 hand-picked experts that would be deployed around the world in the instance of an actual or potential public health emergency of international concern. This project of 3,000 experts and the costs thereof are going to certainly impact on the national budgets of our health and our countries. Now at the WHA, the World Health Assembly, which has just ended, one article remained on the table, and that being article number 59. In other words, how long countries have to object or to provide a reservation to the IHR amendments in future. Currently, that stands at 12 months. Significantly, a group of countries have proposed draft resolutions which in effect need 4 months to be considered. We may argue that certainly 4 months is not nearly enough time to canvass the views and opinions of sovereign nations and indeed civil society. Ultimately, the working group on the IHR has now decided that the process will be finalized at 2024 at the 77th World Health Assembly. Of course, those of us who've been given a sharp eye on the WHO have realized that this date, 2024, converges with what the WHO anticipates to be the new pandemic treaty. In other words, the IHR amendments and the new pandemic treaty will be converging on the people of the world, unless, of course, the people of the world take a decision to resist and to co-create parallel health and autonomy systems. Now, colleagues, what will happen in this time is intense lobbying to convince World Health Assembly representatives to vote in favor of these amendments. World Health Assembly delegates should remember that the suggestion of sanctions against countries which do not comply with the IHR or the new pandemic treaty have already been raised by EU officials. And so certainly what we are seeing is the weaponization of health via the WHO as the tip of the spear. I would like to also highlight the duplication of process and costs. Certainly having both amendments to the IHR as well as a new pandemic treaty, and no doubt a multitude of papers, white papers, policy decisions, meetings, international travel creates a duplication of process and costs. And so essentially, the WHO is an unending pit of resource wastage that is leaching funds from sovereign nations who would do better to invest those funds into their national health and wellness systems. Although the WHO has no lawful authority over sovereign nations, and ultimately what it does produce are recommendations and not binding decisions. Of course, and it most recently at a press briefing said that it does respect sovereignty and it is passionate about human rights. The fact remains, the WHO is the tip of the spear on the establishment of a one-size-fits-all globalist approach to health with digital passports and social credits already activated or in planning. This is not health. This is biosurveillance. It is what they call health security, and we need to pay close attention to the language that is being used to attempt to shape a very different type of world to what the 99% of us want. The call to action, colleagues, listeners, and viewers around the world is very clear. Stop the WHO and co-create a better way forward for health, autonomy, and sovereignty. I thank you.
A little section here on regional updates. We're going to start with the World Health Organization's role in Africa, and we're going to go back to Shabnam Palisa Mohammed to hear about that. Thank you, Shabnam.
Thank you, Polly, and of course to our colleagues. Let us turn to the role of the WHO in Africa. There is much to discuss, so I will make 8 very concise points. 1. The WHO stands accused of facilitating or legitimizing Pfizer experiments on African Nigerian children without proper informed consent, and this was in 1996. 11 of 200 children experimented on died, and their families, or some of them, only received compensation in 2009. 2. The WHO has never demanded accountability for the harm caused to people by big pharma products, including vaccines. 3. A 2019 inquiry based on emails to senior WHO management claimed systematic discrimination against African WHO staff members and that recruitment processes are corrupt. 4. Whistleblowers also allege that money intended for the Ebola crisis in West Africa and the DRC was mismanaged by WHO staff. These claims are not independently investigated. In other words, the WHO investigates itself. The WHO's malaria study was reported in the BMJ to constitute a serious violation of international ethical standards due to a lack of informed consent of Ghanaian, Malawian, and Kenyan children. The GlaxoSmithKline vaccine, Mosquirix, caused 10 times the amount of cerebral malaria as opposed to unvaxxed people, and a doubling of deaths in the young girls. 6. WHO whistleblowers who spoke out during the COVID-19 chapter were victimized by WHO staff, leading to international campaigns to support whistleblowers. 7. The WHO is supporting mRNA production facilities in Africa, knowing full well the issues with electricity supply crises in countries like South Africa, and simultaneously pushing for the establishment of the African Medicines Agency, which would serve only the interests of Big Pharma. And 8. Like other UN organizations, the WHO is plagued by wasteful spending, disregard for transparency, incompetence, and a failure to adhere to basic democratic standards that respect and uphold the public interest. Of course, I will briefly highlight the WHO's role in South Africa during the COVID chapter. There has been, despite the fact that Africa has the lowest rates of COVID-19 infections and vaccinations, primarily because people relied on natural health practices and natural medicine, which the WHO has a role in trying to block, the WHO is still trying to force unsafe and ineffective experimental vaccine products on the people of South Africa and Africa in particular. Democracies have been subverted with lockdowns, often violent tactics used by the police and by the military. And of course, there's been a devastating impact on economy. In South Africa, for example, over 30% of unemployment is where this country is and is currently facing as part of a broader economic and socio-economic crisis. In addition, over 70% of South African youth are currently unemployed. This would, of course, pave the way for loans from the IMF and the World Bank, holding Africa, South Africa, and perhaps the world hostage to a constant cycle of debt and corruption. I'd like to turn from there now to talk about some solutions which some of our colleagues may also speak to during the course of this press conference. Let's bear in mind Articles 2, 19, 20, 21, and 22 of the WHO Constitution, and the WHO's failure to respect and abide by its own legal standards on necessity, reasonableness, and proportionality in decision-making. Here are some of the solutions we are offering. Number one, an international and independent investigation of the WHO's role in each of our countries, both historically and during the COVID-19 chapter, is essential in order for us to be able to move forward. This investigation should cover maladministration, conflicts of interest, and corruption. Where criminal acts, recklessness, or negligence are involved, diplomatic immunity must fall away. Second, as my colleague Dr. Astrid Stickelberger recently presented at the WHO conference, there are three options in dealing with the IHR amendments, the new pandemic treaty or accord, and other tactics that may be used by the UN, WHO, and WEF machinery. And these are A, opposition, to object or to vote against amendments to legislation, or to make a reservation on part of the amendments which constitute a violation of individual rights and sovereignty. 2, representativity and self-determination of the people, using existing legislation within the United Nations infrastructure, or alternatively, a reliance on natural and common law. It is possible for the people of our world to make representations to the United Nations that enhance representativity and self-determination. And 3, the option that I and many others advocate for, a defund and exit of the WHO for the following reasons: mismanagement, conflict of interest, corruption, the costs of facilitating and managing these legal or illegal instruments which will run into billions, and of course, the stifling of free speech and information led by the WHO. Other solutions are contained in the open letter regarding the new pandemic treaty and the IHR. I must pause to mention that this open letter by the World Council for Health, supported by Children's Health Defense and many other partners and allies around the world, reached 415 million people in 7 days. And indeed, it is a testimony to the power of the people. Some of these other actions that can be taken include raising awareness on the ground and online, campaigning through rallies, political mobilization, and legal action, collaborating as coalition, exploring activist toolboxes, my apologies, engaging global indigenous leadership, notifying World Health Assembly delegates to oppose amendments, and of course, activating people's parliaments, legislatures, or referendums to oppose these power grabs. In closing, certainly, the evidence of the failures of the WHO to provide clear and ethical guidance on masks, lockdowns, repurposed medicines, and experimental injections, as well as the clear impossibility of reform, mean that the only way to secure real health is to defund the WHO and exit the globalist machinery. I am of the belief that the proposed IHR amendments and the new pandemic accord have given the world a strong opportunity to do exactly that, to defund and exit, and to build a new and better pathway to health through ethical collaboration untainted by funding conflicts of interest. The call to action is clear. Stop the WHO and co-create a better way for a better world. I thank you.
Thank you, Shabnam. The World Health Organization legal battle in India. We have our truly brilliant attorney with us, Dipali Ojha from India. So over to you, Dipali.
Thank you, Polly. Hello, everyone. Greetings from India. I thank all my colleagues for your brilliant presentation. It's an honor to be here today. And as we discuss the IHR, its implications and dangers posed to our democracy, please allow